So it was great that Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, intervened in the Brexit debate yesterday and made it clear that Britain needs to and will eventually rejoin. And of course, it's not rocket science. The fact that 86% of our younger generations want to rejoin means that that is inevitable. But the one thing, in my view, which will expedite this is food. And I spoke about this morning with James O'Brien on LBC. Have a listen.
Liz is in Cricklade. You've always said sooner, so you need to persuade me of what's changed.
Well, I have always said sooner, and that's because I work in food, and people who work in food can see that that is going to pull us back. We all need food, and it's getting shorter in supply. It's becoming more expensive, and that is the reason that was always the biggest reason why Brexit was the stupidest thing we could do, particularly coming out of the single market and customs union. But given the mess, and we've heard at this mess in the COVID inquiry, that this shower has made of COVID, why does anyone think they're going to do Brexit well? And what they've done to our food system is the most appalling mess you can ever think of.
Let me read you something from the Farmer's Guardian that you've probably already seen, but it is a counter to the point that you make. Jacob Rees-Mogg has failed to recognise the invaluable contribution of farmers and growers in domestic food production after comments made regarding seasonal labour on farms. Mr Rees-Mogg said the UK does not need fruit pickers and suggested cheaper fruit should be imported from abroad. So let's say you're both right, that we have completely decimated our own food production systems, but the solution would be to import lower quality, cheaper stuff, deregulated stuff from abroad.
But the problem with that, James, is that firstly, with Asia and the emerging market that it is, the competition on world markets is enormous, and as a small country, we are getting weaker. And added to that, we're getting poorer. So it means that we've got less clout on world markets. And the global food situation, because of war and climate change, is also contracting. It's dire. So it means there's less food to go around. So it actually adds to the weight to get back into where we belong.
Why does it? Because food security doesn't depend on single market membership. It depends on growing more ourselves, and we can do that anyway.
No, it doesn't depend. We've got a very difficult climate. We can't grow the food all year round.
They're growing haricot beans now. They're growing haricot beans in...
Andrew Ward is, yes, I've seen.
There you go.
Yes,
patriotic
that's
beans.
Very good. We can live on English baked beans. No, the damage we could have done, and if they'd really wanted it to work, they should have put a lot of effort into increasing food production here, because it would have made us sovereign. A country that cannot feed itself is not sovereign. And it's the reason why we joined the European Union in the beginning. We had the empire that fed us, and that happened because we repealed the Corn Laws in 1846. We then learned a very hard lesson in 2 world wars about food, and all of that was forgotten in a sort of mad night of Brexititis. And people have just been going around looking for something amazing to make it worth it. But as we're seeing, food is getting more expensive. Shelves are getting emptier. Christmas dinner is under threat again.
So, okay, we've politely disagreed about this before, but more from a position, I think, you have an interesting blend of pragmatism and optimism, whereas I'm mostly pessimism and optimism management. It's because in the words of that famous film, it's the hope that gets you. I can deal with the despair, but I've weaned myself off hope. You have a different investment in it because you are in agriculture and in politics, for people who don't know. In fact, the next hour we're going to be asking about the Liberal Democrats. So you've used your call up now, Liz. You won't be allowed to ring in again. But
well, that's just as well.
Does your optimism increase? Are you more optimistic than you were last time we talked about this?
Well, look, James, you can afford to pay more for your food, and it's not probably hurting you anywhere.
Don't make it about me. I'm James O'Brexit. I want a reunion immediately.
No, but you're saying that you think it's, you're more pessimistic about it. I just see that the need for food is great. We all need to eat, and even if you are fairly well off, as people become more stretched
But will they join the dots?
Food.
When I go into Morrison's and I see empty shelves that were simply not there 5 years ago, and I note inflation and I see increased prices in food, will people join the dots?
course they will. But, we're now looking at an implosion of the Conservative Party. Keir Starmer is going to be our next Prime Minister. He is not the same as Rishi Sunak. He is going to be responding to what's going on the ground. And that response is going to have to be urgent. And the destruction of food here is so great that we are not going to be able to come up to feed the British people. It's going to take years to recoup what we've lost.
So what's the sort of, I forget what the correct figure of speech is, but the sort of point of no return? What's the hump? What's the point at which the momentum becomes irresistible, do you think?
I think we're going to have, the food, as I've said all along, the food shortages are going to get greater. The food inflation is going to get worse. So eventually
people are going to clock that the diet has changed, the shopping situation has changed so much, and they will hopefully understand that it is intrinsically linked to membership of the single market. Thank you, Liz. You're sitting there thinking, oh, he's back on his Brexit hobby horse. But Jacob Rees-Mogg told you, A, that fruit picking wouldn't be affected, then that the vacancies could easily be filled by British people, and now that we don't need fruit pickers at all, because we'll be able to bring in pesticide-dripping plums from China? I don't know. Where would it even come from? If it's going to be cheaper, it has to be not abiding by the legislation that we abided by when we were in the European Union. The only way you can do it cheaper is by using pesticides that you're not allowed to use, or by having lower standards, or poorer working, perhaps a little bit of child labour, bring it in from a country with child labour. And yet no one notices. A quick word on why I love this job so much. So I'm reading that thing. I just read it to Liz in Cricklade. Well, you may not realise that Liz in Cricklade on other shows is Liz Webster, the chair of Save British Farming. And they ring her and they book her to come on. But she actually gets quoted further down the story that I just read to her. So I'm sitting here going, you may have seen the story in the Farmer's Guardian, and then quote it from the first two paragraphs, which is Rees-Mogg banging on about why we don't need farmers anymore, or fruit pickers. And then actually the quote in response to that is from the first caller that we put on the show today. Jacob Rees-Mogg says Liz Webster of Save British Farming is not only failing his constituents with his inflammatory anti-British farming outbursts backing foreign lower standard imports, but also the country as a whole. So is it going to happen sooner rather than later? Peter is in Oxford. Peter, what do you think?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Well, first of all, thanks for putting on Liz. She's brilliant as always.
She is, isn't she?
I agree entirely with everything she says.
Once you appreciate that Brexit has ensured that even within the United Kingdom, English farmers are worse off because the devolved nations have continued with food subsidies and English farmers have been forced into environmental schemes or no schemes at all and having to intensify their production. Then when you mix in the European farmers who do not have the trade barriers that we have, who also are subsidised and have freedom of movement, so they're not facing the labour problems that we are, and they're not facing the bad trade deals that we have, which are only going to get worse every year, then you understand why Brexit is so bad for food and farming. Don't forget to press the subscribe button and comment below. Let us know what you think.